Welcome to EDU 6350, Week 5, which covers Chapters 9 and 10. We will be under the heading of Developing the Curriculum, Improved Outcomes through Systems Approaches. But looking at Chapter 9, we're specifically looking at instructional goals or essential questions, which really can be the same or different things, and instructional objectives or learning targets. So I want us to think as you read this particular chapter. So how do the instructional goals or essential questions differ from objectives and learning targets? Most of us in our districts have instructional goals or essential questions. They're usually the big arching theme or something large that we want the children to grasp. However, instructional objectives or learning targets can be those small pieces that we want children to achieve within learning the large instructional goal or essential question. So really they must be aligned, and they must be aligned to the curriculum. We know that our curriculum in the state of Florida are the FSA standards. So if the essential questions or the objectives are not aligned to the FSA standards, then basically you're not teaching the right thing, and you certainly are not teaching what the students will be tested on. So how can aligning the instructional goals or essential questions and the objectives with the curriculum goals improve student outcomes? As mentioned on the last slide, you've got to follow what those standards are. The problem is, I see in the state of Florida with our standards, is they're worded in such tricky ways that sometimes we have to spend quite a bit of time unpacking that language just to understand what our students are supposed to learn. We have to make sure that the alignment of our essential questions and our instructional objectives or targets are really put in a place where they mirror or exactly line up with the curriculum goals that the state has set before us. So that brings us to accountability. Accountability is not really a bad word. I really believe, in my opinion, we have to have accountability. Most of you do not remember years ago when there was no accountability, before No Child Left Behind, before we had FCAT and all that. Being a teacher, it was frustrating because what the students were doing in my classroom was not what the students were doing in other classrooms. I remember specifically a particular teacher that taught next door to me for about 3 years didn't even begin teaching during the day until around 10 a.m. When the students came in, he had his newspaper and his coffee on the desk, and he had games like checkers, Monopoly, things like that, all set out for the kids every single day, and for 2 hours that's what they did until he, quote, woke up and was able to teach them. There's no way that those students learned what they were supposed to learn in that short amount of time, with 2 hours of their day, basically 10 hours a week, taken up playing games. Now, games were not the enemy. I think games have a place in a classroom to teach the students social skills and how to learn to disagree with others in a civil way. However, it doesn't take the place of direct instruction. And it was pretty well seen on tests that we would take at the end of the year, but there was no, for lack of a better word, consequence or anything if a teacher's class did not do well or if students didn't do well. So accountability came into play, and it's really, really impacted us. Now, this is the part of accountability that I don't like. I feel like they've put now too high stakes on the test. We've swung the pendulum again all the way to the side, and we haven't found a happy medium of how accountability and learning can meet. So maybe you have some ideas on that. Now we're going to move on to Chapter 10, which discusses evidence-based instruction. So talking about accountability really moves us into what kind of instructional practices are used in the classroom. In the IDEA Act that was passed, it specifically states that students are to be taught, and especially with interventions, those students that are behind, with evidence-based or research-based instructional practices. First of all, I want to tell you that the research-based and evidence-based in this case are synonymous. So when we talk about those two things, we really mean the same things. It means these practices have been proven either by educational researchers or by companies that have outside researchers come. These particular practices are proven and have shown student improvement. Now, this is where the tricky thing comes in. In today's world of get your hands on it very, very quickly, we can go to Pinterest and find an activity that might be a good activity, and our kids might have a lot of fun with it. But are we truly using those research-based practices that are said to be tried and true, that children will learn if these practices are used, or children will improve if these practices are used? Okay? So some of our things that we're teaching or we're using in the classroom might have to be set aside and replaced with research-based instructional practices. Now we need to talk about the science of learning and the science of instruction. Let's start with the science of instruction. So the science of instruction generally, as stated in your text, is evidence-based instructional strategies, those for which there is evidence and or research that supports the use of the particular instructional strategy for improvement learning. Evidence-based instruction, not just, hey, this is going to be a fun thing for my students to do, but this is a strategy that has been proven over time to work to help students learn. Then we move to the science of learning. So the science of learning is how students learn most efficiently. So really, only by putting the two together and knowing those types of things can you effectively reach all learners. So how are you going to do that? Well, one of the ways is to get into the research. A book that I just picked up is called Essentials of Evidence-Based Academic Interventions. It's by Wendling, W-E-N-D-L-I-N-G, and Mather, M-A-T-H-E-R. Great book for talking about students that are behind in certain areas and what are the research-based practices to reach them. One of the places that you can go is the What Works Clearinghouse. That is something that nationally has been put together for teachers that is based on research. So you can search certain strategies that you want to learn or want to teach by subject matter. It's called the What Works Clearinghouse. Your assignments this week, you have discussion week 5. Maybe somebody will go on the What Works Clearinghouse and check it out and talk a little bit about it in their discussion. That would be cool. Also, you need to begin on your final assignment. Okay, now there are 2 pieces to this. There's the actual paper assignment and the presentation. So in the paper, the explanation and the choices you have for it are in the syllabus on page 8, and the rubric is on page 9. And then the presentation, the explanation, and the rubric are on page 10 and 11. It is time for you to go ahead and get started on this if you have not already done so, because it will take you some time to meet the requirements. As always, if you have any questions or thoughts, put them in the blog for the week. I think it's important that we all take a look at that and kind of have that conversation. And then, of course, you can email me with any questions that you might have. Have a great week.